Alrighty guys, thank you for coming back again for another video, and today we're going to be talking about two different hormonal systems. We're going to be talking about testosterone, and we're also going to be talking about the thyroid. Hopefully we got enough time to go through both of those in today's video, but if we don't, I can always dedicate a future video to just the thyroid. So here's testosterone, kind of 101. And when we think about testosterone, of course testosterone is the hormones associated with masculinity and with men. It is a very important hormone, and there's a lot of issues specifically about this hormone because there's a lot of misinformation about this hormone. So we're going to talk a little bit about natural testosterone production first, and then we'll kind of segue into talking about things like testosterone replacement therapy. So here's your brain. Let's imagine your brain's here. And what happens is you've got this really cool thing called the HPTA axis, which stands for hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis. And essentially what this means is there's this kind of gland here at the bottom of the brain. I'm not a neurologist. And this sends signals, specifically LH and FSH, to the testes down here, and it tells them, it activates the Sertoli cells, and it tells them to start to produce this magical hormone that we know as testosterone. So then what happens is testosterone comes out of your testes. Testosterone then flows through, that could look really bad. Testosterone comes out of your testes and it goes into the tissues, and it does all these really great things. But testosterone itself actually converts into two more powerful hormones. And so testosterone kind of goes into this two separate pathways. It can go into the 5-alpha reductase enzyme and get converted into what we call DHT, or it can be converted in the aromatase enzyme. Remember, ACE stands for enzyme, and that can be converted into estradiol. And so when we think about testosterone, we also have to consider these two other hormones, DHT or dihydrotestosterone, and estradiol, which is the more female hormone. So this is kind of the process. Now, one of the interesting things about estradiol is estradiol actually feeds back into this loop. And so based off the amount of estrogen that we have, your body will then produce more or produce less testosterone. So it's actually this really unique mechanism because the testosterone doesn't really feed back to itself. It's actually the converted form of testosterone, estradiol, that will actually tell the hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis, the HPTA axis, to either increase or decrease this signal of LH and FSH. So that's really interesting in and of itself. Now what's also interesting is this DHT. DHT could have a whole separate video on it, but dihydrotestosterone is really cool because this is where we get a lot of the quote-unquote male characteristics from testosterone. So dihydrotestosterone causes a lot of body hair growth. It can cause issues with hair loss in men. Hey Django, my cat's over here, you can't see him. DHT can also really improve strength. It's a lot of anabolic steroids are based off of either the backbone of testosterone or they're based off the backbone of dihydrotestosterone. And so depending on that, you can kind of get different effects with these different anabolic steroids. But DHT alone, dihydrotestosterone alone, is a really interesting hormone. A lot of people point the blame at DHT for causing things like male pattern baldness and hair loss. And while that is absolutely true in certain circumstances, there's also a lot of other factors that contribute to hair loss. And so we'll talk about some of those when we talk about the thyroid here later on. So this is kind of your system that's ongoing 24/7. It doesn't start and stop. It doesn't turn on one day out of the week, not another day out of the week. But there's a lot of things that we can naturally do to improve this whole system of testosterone production. For one, we've got to think about, so when it comes to natural optimization, we have to consider a couple different things. One, we want sleep. Sleep is the foundation, and I mean that quite literally. For many years, people, myself included, thought of health as being 3 pillars. You have your diet, your exercise, and your sleep. I would really argue that it's 2 pillars, diet and exercise, and they're on a foundation of sleep. Django is like I don't know if y'all can see this, but he's literally just watching here. So sleep is super important for this whole process. When this process occurs, when you're recovered, when you're feeling healthy, your body is going to produce more testosterone. The other thing that's important is not being malnourished. And what I mean by that is, well, honestly, you know what I mean by that. If you are just super duper skinny, your body fat's going to be low, so you're not going to be. Oh, that's another thing. Coming back to the estradiol, let's talk about that real quick one more time. Estradiol lives a lot in fat tissue. There is a lot of aromatase activity that occurs inside of fat tissue. So the more obese someone is, the more body fat someone carries, typically they're going to be converting more of their testosterone into estradiol, and that in turn is going to kind of cause this whole process to have issues with. Because when estrogen's high, it signals the hypothalamus pituitary axis to slow down LH and FSH signaling, and when estrogen is low, it tells the hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis to increase LH and FSH. So, sorry, brief pause there. Not being malnourished. If you are in a caloric deficit for an extended period of time, you're a natural athlete, you do not take any exogenous forms of testosterone, then you are going to be at a disadvantage because, again, over time, you're going to have a significant increase in testosterone at the very start. But if you carry that diet from, let's say, 3 months into 12 months, that is going to eventually cause diminishing returns and your testosterone will start to go down. Another thing to talk about when it comes to natural optimization is supplements. Supplements are talked about a lot on the internet, and there's a lot of different supplements that work, and there's a lot of other supplements that don't work. I want to kind of list these into 2 different categories. We've got categories that are reporting to directly increase testosterone, and then we've got categories that will indirectly influence your body to be in a more optimal state to then produce more testosterone. So we're going to talk about, sorry, Django, we're going to talk about direct and then indirect. I'm not going to have time to go through thyroid in today's video, so we'll do that another time. Indirect. Okay. Oh, sorry, bud. 1 second, you can watch right here. So, direct forms of supplementation that can improve testosterone is going to be Tangat, and then it's also going to be Fedosia agrestis. So these 2 supplements can sometimes improve testosterone. Now I want to be very clear here. If your testosterone, let's imagine that this is the testosterone reference range, right? So we've got 200 here nanograms per deciliter, and then we've got, let's say, 1200 here per deciliter. If you are here and you take Tangat and Fedosia agrestis, do not expect to get here. That's not going to happen. If you take Tangat and Fedosia agrestis, you might get to here. And that's an improvement. But if you're trying to treat legitimate testosterone deficient symptoms, things like low libido, poor sleep, trouble maintaining muscle, being tired after work, falling asleep, blah, 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 you're not going to solve those symptoms with just taking Tangat and Fedosia agrestis. I promise you. And I'm sorry, that is the truth, and I've seen it happen time and time again. Now, indirect forms of testosterone optimization are going to be things like magnesium. Things like magnesium, fish oil, vitamin D. What else? We've got berberine, just making sure that you're insulin sensitive can be very effective. It's not going to directly influence testosterone, but theoretically it's going to make you more insulin sensitive, which is going to then help with muscle growth, which is then going to help influence testosterone. Really think I'm missing one, but I can't remember what it is. If I think of it, I'll talk about it later. But those are some things that you can take indirectly to help kind of establish a better hormonal profile. Now, there are other things more from a pharmaceutical standpoint. Things like tadalafil can sometimes increase androgen receptor density, which then gives you more use out of the testosterone that you're producing. L-carnitine is theorized to do the same thing. So those are other two things that we can put in kind of the extras in terms of indirect testosterone optimization categories. Now, one of the pharmaceuticals that's on the market that is touted in the, I wouldn't call it a natural optimization, but let's just call it not taking TRT, is going to be a medication called enclomiphene. And enclomiphene is really interesting in how it works. So enclomiphene is classified as a SERM, which stands for selective estrogen receptor modulator. And what this SERM does is it actually cuts off the signal, which is really interesting in the brain. Because now your brain can't receive any signal about estrogen, it thinks that you have no estrogen. And so because it thinks you have no estrogen, it makes your LH and FSH go up like through the roof, which then in turn tells the testes to then increase testosterone, which then in turn, you get the picture, it increases everything. But because this enclomiphene is in place, it's blocking the estradiol, which then just means that your testosterone kind of keeps going up and up. And so enclomiphene is really interesting, but it also doesn't come without its costs. And so some of its costs include the fact that we just don't really have that much long-term data on the use of enclomiphene. I think the longest study studying enclomiphene was about 18 months. And so we don't have, when we compare that to actual testosterone replacement therapy, which the first testosterone injections were given out back in like 1934, we almost have 100 years of data on actual testosterone, and we've got max 18 months on enclomiphene. So I say all that to say there's a big question mark here about if it would be effective long term. And having had the privilege and the opportunity to work with some clients that have been prescribed and have been on enclomiphene for long periods of time, often due to fertility reasons, I can tell you that over time it tends to wear off. It tends to not be as effective, and it sometimes can be accompanied by some bizarre or weird psychological effects. I don't think you're supposed to be smelling that, dude. Sorry. So that's enclomiphene. So switching gears a little bit more. Okay, Jenga, you can't be up there, sir. Back here. Okay. So switching gears a little bit more. We were talking about natural optimization. So enclomiphene is often kind of put in the category of being quote unquote natural optimization. I wouldn't necessarily call it that, but it is technically still natural because it's your natural hormones doing their thing. They're just being manipulated a little bit. So whatever. Now let's talk about actual testosterone replacement therapy. So I'll scribble out all of this type of stuff. Well, actually, let me leave this up here for just 1 second. So let me do this. I'll keep this up. Keep this here. We'll actually change this to be TRT 101. So testosterone replacement therapy, or TRT, is exactly what it says it is, or it should be. Testosterone replacement therapy, meaning you are replacing this testosterone that is coming out of your testicles. And when you say replace, meaning you're replacing it, you're taking extra super physiological amounts of testosterone. So I say that to say that when people are talking about TRT and they're taking 300, 400 milligrams of testosterone, that's not testosterone replacement therapy at that point. That is what I would like to call TET, testosterone enhancement therapy. And that's not a real thing. That's something that someone made up, and I thought it sounded good. What? So when we take testosterone, what essentially happens is we get rid of this. So when you take exogenous testosterone, your testes say, hey, dude, meaning brain, we're good. And essentially what that does is that then tells your brain to stop producing LH and FSH, because now you're getting testosterone from an outside source. And I want to be very clear here, because this is one of the biggest myths that I hear about testosterone. If you take testosterone and you stop taking testosterone, your natural testosterone levels will come back over time. There are very rare circumstances, people with TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, people with testicular torsion events, people with varicoceles. There's some physical abnormalities that can prevent that type of situation from happening, but I would say 9 out of 10 times, at a minimum, we are going to see that person naturally recover their natural testosterone. Now, with that said, I don't want to hear this in the comment section, so let me advise on this too. So this is 200 nanograms per deciliter to 1200 nanograms per deciliter. Let's say you start taking testosterone and your natural testosterone levels are 346. And let's say you take testosterone exogenously, meaning you're injecting it into your body for 5 years. And then you come back 5 years later, you get off testosterone, and you remeasure your levels, and your levels are, let's say, 245. You will then make the very bold claim that using testosterone lowered my natural levels. No, it didn't. You just got 5 years older. Your natural levels were going to fall anyways. You being on testosterone had nothing to do with that. Your natural levels are just going to fall over time. Now, that's my soapbox, and I'll get off of it. When you're taking testosterone replacement therapy, there's a couple very important things to remember. TRT really depends on frequency. When you're stimulating, adding in, testosterone, you are trying to mimic what your body naturally produces. Like I was talking about earlier, your body doesn't produce all of its testosterone at once, like one time per week, like doing one big injection once per week. It is constantly producing its testosterone. And so we want to mimic that with a frequency of testosterone. Now, if you can, and you don't mind needles, the ultimate recommendation is to do it daily. A lot of people can't afford the psychological ability to adhere to that type of protocol, and so a lot of people end up doing it every other day, or EOD. Some people end up doing it 3 times per week, but if you don't mind the high frequency of injections, do it daily. I promise you, it will keep your levels as flatlined as possible. You won't have these big peaks and valleys. You won't have any issues with that, because the issue is a lot of these clinics out there are prescribing people 1 injection per week of testosterone, which essentially, if this is day 1 through 7, you freaking peak up your testosterone and you come crashing right back down by day 7. And no one wants to have that hormonal fluctuation. That's typically where you're seeing an increase in estrogen. And you're also seeing a lot of issues like acne, a lot of different stuff from infrequency of injection. So the more frequent, the better. The other thing to be important with when it comes to testosterone is checking blood pressure. This is the easiest thing to do. So many people forget to do it, and it is the #1 way to prevent any type of cardiovascular disease related issues from occurring, is just keeping your blood pressure in check. That doesn't necessarily mean taking medications for it unless you need to, but checking your blood pressure at least 2 to 3 times per week, without a doubt, is going to save your life for 80% of you. Take your time to check your blood pressure. Half of the people that have a heart attack do not recover from their first heart attack. Heart disease is still the #1 killer of people globally. It is no joke. Check your blood pressure. And I would say that even if you're not taking testosterone, still check your blood pressure. Frequency, checking blood pressure. The other issue with TRT, or the other thing that I see, is estrogen blockers. Now, you do not need an estrogen blocker. You shouldn't. If you need an estrogen blocker, it means you're taking too much testosterone. And I hate to say that because I like testosterone and I like to take a lot of testosterone. But if your estrogen is getting too high, it means you can't tolerate the dose that you're currently on. It means that you need to either get rid of body fat so you eliminate aromatase enzyme activity and therefore lower estrogen, or you can take natural things to control your estrogen, things like calcium deglucarate, and then also things like DIM. These are 2 natural and herbal supplements that will lower your testosterone. And yes, if you're natural, you can use those as well. They also help with lowering estrogen, which then in turn increases testosterone. So those are some natural estrogen blockers that you could use, but you want to avoid anything like an AI. That stands for aromatase enzyme, or aromatase inhibitor. Things like Arimidex, Aromacin, anastrozole, And then you also have more serious ones, things like letrozole. Definitely want to avoid those. Those are all just going to crush your estrogen. There's suicidal forms of AIs, there's non-suicidal forms of AIs. There's a difference that I won't go into today. But at the end of the day, they're both going to crush your estrogen, which then in turn messes up a lot of other stuff. So you don't want to take AIs. Trust me, I've been doing this for a very long period of time, know what I'm talking about, and just stay away from AIs. And if you're currently on an AI, you need to either inject more You either need to inject more frequently, or you need to lower your dose, or you just need to go on a cut and lose some body fat. So that is pretty much everything as far as testosterone goes. Now, before we end the video here, I want to talk a little bit about the thyroid, because I think I've got some time. Well, at least I hope I do. Let's see. Oh, yep, cool. All right, so the thyroid. This is our brain again. This is our little hypothalamus pituitary axis, we want to call it. This is the thyroid gland. Thyroid, the word thyroid comes from, I think it's the Greek word thymus, which stands for shield, so it kind of looks like a shield. This gland is really important, and this gland I do not fully understand yet. I don't pretend to understand fully, but I do want to tell you guys what I do know about it because I think it's really interesting. So the thyroid is really what controls our metabolism. It controls our metabolic rate. This really is what determines our energy levels. It also determines how many calories we burn in a day, even with just sitting still, like everybody's metabolic rate. It also has a lot to do with our skin. It has to do with temperature regulation. Django, stop. Has to do with temperature regulation. It also helps with digestion, helps with cholesterol clearance, helps with hair growth. A lot of different things that the thyroid is responsible for. And so essentially what happens is this gland in the brain secretes TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. That then tells the gland in the neck to produce T4. And T4 is really just a 4-iodine structure, so think of it kind of like this. And the reason it's a 4-iodine structure is so it can travel throughout the system. It then travels throughout our system, and then it gets converted using a deiodinase enzyme. There's 3 different types of deiodinase, deiodinase 1, 2, and 3, and it converts it into T3. Now T3 is what we consider the active thyroid hormone. So this is the hormone that actually helps our bodies with the metabolism, with the digestion, with the skin, with the body temperature, with all that type of stuff. And so this is really kind of what matters most. And then based off the amount of T3 and the amount of T4 in your system, it then feeds back to the brain to tell the TSH to either go down or go up. So if you have a low amount of T3 and you have a low amount of T4, your brain should be receiving the signal of speed up, increase production, increase this TSH signaling to then hopefully increase the amount of T3, the amount of T4 in your system. That's in a very functional system. Now, in a lot of dysfunctional systems, sometimes you won't get that feedback, and that's why there's another thing that I haven't mentioned yet called reverse T3. That's an RT3. Reverse T3 does everything that T3 does. It's like a T3 in disguise, but it doesn't do it. So it binds to the same place that T3 binds to, but then it doesn't actually cause any of the stuff that T3 is supposed to cause. And so that in turn causes the cell to be bound with what it thinks is T3, but it's not actually T3, it's actually reverse T3. And so then that cell goes without T3, which can cause actually hair loss and shedding. It can also cause a lot of issues with metabolic rate, insulin resistance, cortisol levels. There's reverse T3 is tied to a lot of those types of things. And so we really want to keep reverse T3 low because that tells us that most of our T4 is being converted into T3. Now, how do we do that? Reverse T3 is highest when you're in long states of fasting. So a lot of people get into this habit of like, oh, I want to drop some weight. Let me try intermittent fasting. Let me just time restrict eat. What they don't know is if you have a really kind of messed up metabolic health already or metabolism already, and then you start time restrict eating and doing these fasting, what's going to happen is your reverse T3 is going to go up and it's going to go up and it's going to go up. And that's going to prevent your T4 from converting into T3. Instead, it's going to be coming straight into this reverse T3, which in turn is going to prevent the T3 from doing its job, which again is energy, metabolism, temperature regulation, all those types of things. And so then that ends up with that person not being able to lose weight despite doing everything right. And so we see that a lot, or I see that a lot, and kind of with a lot of my clients. So that's kind of a basic on thyroid. I think it's a super interesting system, and so leave questions in the comments if you have any. So that was kind of a little quick segment on thyroid, and then also a discussion about testosterone. Thank you for coming for today's video. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys on the next one.